Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Liberty's Dawn and watched the stars. His ship had been traveling through this sector for 3 months now, mapping new systems and looking for planets that humans could settle on. It was quiet work, the kind Jake liked. No drama, no trouble, just the calm of deep space and the excitement of discovery. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange on the sensors," Lisa Hayes said from her position at the tactical station. She was his first officer and had been with him for 5 years. If Lisa said something was strange, Jake paid attention. "What kind of strange?" Jake asked, moving to stand behind her chair. "Multiple contacts, big ones. They just appeared at the edge of the system. I count at least 40 ships, and they're heading straight for us." Jake felt his stomach tighten. 40 ships was a fleet, and humanity had never encountered another spacefaring species before. This was first contact, the moment every explorer dreamed about and feared at the same time. "Paul, get me a communication channel ready," Jake ordered. Paul Bennett, his chief engineer, nodded and started working at his station. "Channel open, Captain," Paul said a moment later. Jake took a deep breath. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the human exploration ship Liberty's Dawn. We come in peace and wish to establish friendly relations with your people." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the screen flickered to life, and Jake found himself looking at something he had only imagined before. The alien was tall and covered in dark scales. Its eyes were yellow and cold, and when it spoke, its voice came through the translator as harsh and commanding. "I am War Marshal Krenix of the Zathrian Empire. You will surrender your vessel immediately and prepare to be boarded. Your species will submit to Zathrian rule, or you will be destroyed." Jake blinked. This was not how first contact was supposed to go. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're explorers, not soldiers. We have no interest in conflict. Perhaps we could meet and discuss this peacefully." Krenix made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your words prove your weakness. The Zathrian Empire has observed your transmissions for some time. We know what you are. You are a soft species, divided and weak. You speak of peace because you lack the strength for war. You have 72 hours to contact your leaders and arrange your surrender. All human colonies will become property of the Empire. All humans will serve." "Now wait just a minute," Jake started, but Krenix cut him off. "To show we are serious, we will provide a demonstration." The screen went dark. Jake looked at Lisa, who was already checking her sensors. Her face went pale. "Captain, they're targeting the mining outpost on the 3rd planet. There are 300 people there, all civilians." "Hail them again!" Jake shouted. "Tell them those are unarmed miners." "They're not responding," Paul said, his fingers flying over his controls. Jake watched helplessly as the Zathrian fleet fired on the small outpost. The weapons were powerful beyond anything humans had. Within seconds, the outpost was gone. 300 lives snuffed out just like that, just to make a point. "Get us out of here," Jake ordered, his voice quiet and hard. "Maximum speed back to Earth. Kevin, make sure you're recording everything. Every word, every sensor reading, everything." Kevin Price, the tactical officer, nodded grimly. "Already on it, Captain." As the Liberty's Dawn turned and began accelerating away from the Zathrian fleet, Jake couldn't stop thinking about those miners. They had been workers, families, people just trying to make a living on the frontier. And they had died because some alien empire thought humanity was weak. "They didn't even try to talk," Lisa said quietly. "They just decided we were beneath them." "They made a mistake," Jake said. "They think we're weak because we choose peace. They don't understand that there's a difference between choosing peace and being unable to fight." "Do you think Earth will surrender?" Paul asked. Jake looked at the stars rushing past as his ship fled toward home. "I don't know, but I know this. They killed 300 innocent people without a second thought. They didn't ask questions, didn't try diplomacy, just killed. And they gave us an ultimatum, like we're animals to be tamed. What do you think will happen? Lisa asked. Jake remembered his history lessons, the ones every human child learned. He remembered studying the world wars, the conflicts that had nearly destroyed humanity before they learned to work together. He remembered learning about the warriors and soldiers who had defended their homes when there was no other choice. Humanity had built a peaceful civilization, but it was built on the bones of a violent past. Humans knew war intimately, perhaps too well. That was why they avoided it. I think the Zathrians just made the biggest mistake of their lives, Jake said slowly. They looked at humanity and saw our peace, our art, our culture, our debates and disagreements. They saw us trying to solve problems with words instead of weapons, and they thought that made us weak. They don't understand that we choose peace because we know what war really costs. We've been there. We've done that. And we decided to be better. The Liberty's Dawn continued its journey home, carrying news that would change everything. Behind them, the Zathrian fleet moved forward, confident in their superiority. War Marshal Krenix stood on his flagship bridge and felt satisfied. Another species would fall before the Empire, just like all the others. The humans would surrender, and if they didn't, they would be crushed. It was simple. It was how things had always been, but Krenix had made an error in judgment, one that would cost his empire dearly. He had looked at humanity's peaceful nature and assumed it meant they couldn't fight. He had seen their reluctance for violence and mistaken it for inability. He had watched their entertainment and their protests and their diplomatic efforts, and he had concluded they were harmless. He had no idea that humanity's peacefulness wasn't weakness. It was wisdom bought with blood and suffering. Humans didn't avoid war because they couldn't fight. They avoided war because they knew exactly how good they were at it, and it terrified them. Jake Morrison stood on his bridge and knew that everything was about to change. The peaceful exploration era was over. Humanity had been given a choice: submit or fight. And knowing humans as he did, knowing their history and their spirit, he knew what choice they would make. The United Terran Council chamber was full when President Daniel Foster walked to the podium. Every representative from every human colony and nation was present, either in person or by hologram. The room buzzed with worried conversations, but silence fell when Foster raised his hand. 3 days ago, Captain Jake Morrison of the Liberty's Dawn made first contact with an alien species called the Zathrians, Foster began. His voice was steady, but everyone could hear the weight behind his words. The contact did not go well. The Zathrians have given us an ultimatum: surrender all our worlds and our freedom, or be destroyed. To prove they were serious, they destroyed the mining outpost on Kepler 7. 300 civilians are dead. The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives shouted questions, some in anger, some in fear. Foster waited for the noise to die down before continuing. I've asked our experts to brief us on what we're facing. General Richard Blake will speak first. General Blake was a tall man with gray hair and a face that had seen too many hard decisions. He stepped to the podium and activated a display showing the Zathrian fleet. The Zathrians have approximately 600 warships that we know of, Blake said. Each one is larger and more heavily armed than our best military vessels. They've conquered at least 15 other species over the past 2 centuries. Their standard tactic is to offer surrender, demonstrate overwhelming force, and then crush any resistance. They're good at what they do because they've been doing it for a long time. So we can't win, someone called out from the audience. I didn't say that, Blake replied. I said they have more ships and bigger guns. That's not the same thing as being unbeatable. Ambassador Claire Newton stood up. She was a woman who had spent her entire career working for peace, negotiating treaties and preventing conflicts. We need to try diplomacy again. One failed contact doesn't mean there's no hope for peace. Perhaps if we explain our position more clearly, show them we're reasonable people, they'll reconsider. They killed 300 miners as a warning, Blake said flatly. That's not the action of people interested in talking. But war will kill millions, Newton insisted. We have to try every possible option before we resort to violence. Foster raised his hand again, calling for quiet. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, you've been studying the recordings from the Liberty's dawn. What can you tell us about Zathrian psychology? Dr. Morgan was a xenopsychologist, one of the few humans who had prepared for this moment by studying theoretical alien mindsets. She looked tired as she stood. The Zathrians respect only strength, she said. In their culture, any species that seeks peace first is automatically considered weak and worthy only of conquest. Every species they've encountered has either fought them immediately or been enslaved. There's no middle ground in their thinking. If we try to negotiate now after they've given their ultimatum, they'll see it as confirmation that we're too weak to resist. It will make things worse, not better. So you're saying we have no choice but to fight? Newton asked. I'm saying they've already made the choice for us, Morgan replied. They declared war the moment they fired on that outpost. The only question is whether we acknowledge reality or pretend we still have options we don't have. The debate continued for hours. Some representatives argued for surrender, saying that life under Zathrian rule would be better than death in a war they couldn't win. Others argued for fighting, saying that freedom was worth any price. Foster listened to all of it, his face showing nothing. Finally, he stood again. I've made my decision. We will not surrender. We will defend our worlds and our people. The Zathrians think we're weak because we value peace. But they're about to learn that there's a difference between being peaceful and being defenseless. General Blake, you have full authorization to mobilize our forces. Blake nodded. Mr. President, we'll need to convert civilian industries to military production. We'll need every shipyard, every factory, every resource we can gather. You'll have it, Foster said. All of it, whatever you need. Across human space, the call went out. On Earth, on Mars, on the colonies scattered among the stars, people heard the news and responded. The response surprised even humanity itself. Admiral Susan Grant took command of the Terran fleet at the main shipyard above Earth. She was a career officer who had spent 20 years keeping the peace during minor disputes between colonies. Now she faced real war, and she was ready. How many ships do we have that can fight? She asked her staff. 200 warships, her tactical officer replied. Another 300 that could be armed if we had time. Mostly patrol vessels and system defense boats. And they have 600, Grant said. Plus, they're bigger and tougher. Anyone have good news? The civilian ships are volunteering, her communications officer reported. Freighter captains, mining vessels, even passenger liners. They're all asking how they can help. Grant smiled. It was a hard smile, but genuine. That's humanity for you. Tell them we'll find ways to use them. Every ship, every person who wants to help, we'll find a place for them. At a research facility on the moon, Dr. Nathan Cross gathered his team of scientists and engineers. They were people who had spent their careers developing better engines, more efficient power systems, ways to mine asteroids and terraform planets. Now they had a new job. We need weapons, Cross said bluntly. Not the kind we use for system defense or asteroid deflection. Real weapons, the kind that can hurt those Zathrian ships. And we need them fast. We have the plasma mining tools, said Andrew Wells, one of his physicists. They cut through rock like butter. With some modifications, they could probably cut through ship hulls, too. Good, Cross said. What else? Karen Hughes, a programmer who had been working on ship AI systems, raised her hand. Our sensor technology is actually better than what the Zathrians seem to have, based on the Liberty's Dawn recordings. We might not have bigger guns, but we can probably see and target better than they can. Excellent, Cross said. Work on that. Give our ships every advantage we can. The team worked through the night and into the next day. They barely stopped for food or sleep. All across human space, similar scenes played out. Engineers modified mining equipment into weapons. Shipyard workers converted civilian vessels into makeshift warships. Factories that had made consumer goods retooled to produce ammunition and armor. In a military base on Mars, Sergeant Chris Palmer reported for duty. He was a veteran of the Titan Rebellion, a minor conflict from 10 years ago that most people had forgotten. He hadn't expected to ever wear his uniform again. "I'm 60 years old," he told the recruitment officer. "You sure you want me?" "You know how to fight and you know how to lead," the officer replied. "That makes you more valuable than 100 kids who've never seen combat. We need you, Sergeant." Palmer nodded and took his assignment. Around him, thousands of others did the same. Young people like Private Amy Dixon signed up by the millions, ready to defend their homes. Retired officers returned to service. Civilians trained to use weapons they'd only seen in museums. The Zathrians had given humanity 72 hours to respond. As the deadline approached, Ambassador Newton made one last attempt. She sent a message to War Marshal Krennic, asking for negotiations, offering to discuss terms. Krennic's response was brief. "Your time is up. Submit or die." Newton looked at the message for a long time. Then she deleted it and walked to the military command center. "General Blake," she said quietly, "I was wrong. They're not interested in peace. Do what you have to do." Blake nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Ambassador. That couldn't have been easy to say." "No," Newton agreed, "but sometimes being wrong is better than being dead." President Foster addressed the people of Earth and all the colonies one more time. "The Zathrians have rejected our attempts at peace. They've killed our people and demanded our surrender. They think we're weak because we tried to avoid this war. They're about to learn that humans don't fight because we want to. We fight because we have to. And when we have to, we're very good at it. Stand strong. Stand together. We will get through this." The 72 hours expired. War Marshal Krennic smiled on his flagship and gave the order to advance. His fleet moved forward, confident and powerful. They expected an easy victory. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Commander Greg Turner watched the Zathrian fleet approach New Boston Colony and knew he was going to die today. The math was simple and brutal. He had 30 human ships defending the colony. The Zathrians had brought 200. The outcome wasn't in question. The only question was how much damage he could do before the end came. "All ships, this is Commander Turner," he said over the fleet channel. "I won't lie to you. We're outnumbered and outgunned. But those colonists down there are counting on us to buy them time to evacuate. Every minute we hold is another 1,000 people who make it to the transport ships. So, we're going to make these minutes count." On the planet below, Colonel Linda Shaw was organizing the evacuation. She had been a logistics officer before the war, the kind of person who made sure supplies got where they needed to be on time. Now she was loading civilians onto ships as fast as she could, knowing that the battle above would decide if they lived or died. "Move, people, move," she shouted at a group of colonists who were trying to bring too much luggage. "Take your family and leave everything else. You can buy new furniture. You can't buy a new life." In space, the Zathrian fleet opened fire. Their weapons were powerful, designed to destroy enemy ships in a few hits. Turner watched 2 of his ships explode in the first volley and felt cold rage settle over him. "All ships, break formation," he ordered. "Don't fight like they expect. Use the asteroid field, use the planet's gravity well, use anything you can. Make them work for every kill." The human ships scattered. The Zathrians had expected a traditional battle, 2 fleets facing each other and trading fire until one side broke. Instead, the human ships darted between asteroids, using them for cover. They fired and moved, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted effectively. Turner took his own ship, the defender, on a crazy run through the debris field near the colony. 3 Zathrian ships followed him, their larger size making them slower in the tight spaces. He led them past a mining station that was supposed to be abandoned. "Now," he said quietly. The mining charges planted throughout the station exploded. The blast caught all 3 Zathrian ships, destroying 2 and crippling the 3rd. It was a trick, simple and basic, but it worked because the Zathrians weren't expecting it. War Marshal Krenix watched from his flagship and felt the first hint of doubt. The battle was going according to plan, more or less. His fleet was winning, but it was taking longer than expected and costing more than predicted. The humans weren't fighting like a proper military. They were using tricks and traps, fighting dirty and unpredictable. "They have no honor," his second-in-command said with disgust. "They have no chance," Krenix replied. "What does honor matter? Press the attack." But the doubt remained. When the battle finally ended 3 hours later, Krenix had taken the colony as planned, but he had lost 40 ships doing it. 40 ships to take one minor human colony defended by 30 vessels. The math was wrong. At this rate, conquering humanity would cost more than the Empire could afford. On the surface, Colonel Shaw had managed to evacuate 90% of the colonists before the Zathrians landed. She and her remaining troops fought a rear-guard action, buying time for the last transports to escape. They used the city itself as a weapon, turning every building into a potential ambush, every street into a killing zone. When Shaw finally surrendered, leading her surviving troops out with their hands up, the Zathrian ground commander looked at the devastation around him and shook his head. Taking the city had cost him a quarter of his forces. These humans fought like demons. News of the battle spread quickly through human space. New Boston had fallen. But the colonists had escaped. Commander Turner and most of his fleet were dead, but they had hurt the Zathrians badly. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a complete defeat either. And it taught humanity something important about how to fight this war. At the main research facility, Dr. Nathan Cross and his team were working around the clock. They had developed several new weapons, but the one Cross was most excited about was the Hellstorm missile. "The Zathrian shields work by deflecting physical objects and absorbing energy," Cross explained to Admiral Grant. "But we found a way to use quantum tunneling to let the warhead bypass the shields entirely. The missile phases through the shield and explodes inside it." "How many can you make?" Grant asked. "We're producing 1,000 a day now," Cross said. "Give us another week and we'll double that." Grant nodded. "Good, because we're going to need every advantage we can get." Across human territory, the war continued. The Zathrians won more battles than they lost, but every victory cost them. Human commanders refused to fight the traditional way. They used ambushes and traps. They retreated when they should have stood and fought, then counterattacked when the Zathrians expected them to run. Captain Julie Sanders commanded a stealth ship called the Ghost. Her mission was to slip deep into Zathrian territory and gather intelligence. She was good at her job, and the information she sent back was priceless. Human planners learned about Zathrian supply routes, fleet movements, and strategic priorities. But Sanders discovered something more important. She intercepted communications between Zathrian commanders and heard the frustration in their voices. They were starting to doubt. The war that was supposed to be quick and easy had turned into a grinding struggle. Some Zathrian officers were questioning whether conquering humanity was worth the cost. Sanders sent her reports back and continued her mission. Knowledge was a weapon too, and she was going to use it. On Earth, President Foster met with his advisors to review the war's progress. "We're losing territory," General Blake reported honestly. "They've taken 6 colonies and are pushing toward more. But we're making them pay for every meter. Their losses are unsustainable if the war goes on long enough." "How long is long enough?" Foster asked. "At the current rate, another year, maybe 2. If we can hold out that long, their military will be too damaged to continue. They'll have to negotiate or risk rebellion in their other territories." And can we hold out that long? Blake hesitated. I don't know. We're taking heavy casualties, too. It depends on how much the people are willing to sacrifice. But Blake didn't need to worry about human determination. Across every colony, people were showing what they were made of. Factory workers pulled double shifts making weapons. Farmers kept producing food despite attacks. Miners kept digging out the resources needed for ship construction. Soldiers kept fighting, even when the odds were impossible. Lieutenant Frank Gibson led a platoon defending a small outpost on the border. His force was tiny, just 40 soldiers against a Zathrian company of 200. The smart thing would have been to retreat. Instead, Gibson dug in and prepared to make the Zathrians work for their victory. "Why are we doing this?" one of his soldiers asked. "We can't win this fight." "We're not trying to win," Gibson replied. "We're trying to make it cost them. Every hour we hold is an hour our engineers spend making better weapons. Our shipyards spend building more ships. Our people spend preparing. We buy time with our blood, and we make sure every drop they take costs them more than it's worth." The battle lasted 2 days. Gibson and his troops used every trick they knew. They collapsed tunnels on advancing Zathrians. They sniped officers from hidden positions. They fought hand-to-hand when ammunition ran low. When it was over, Gibson was dead, and so were most of his troops. But the Zathrian company had been reduced to barely 30 effectives, and they were too damaged to continue their advance. Stories like Gibson's played out across the war zone. Humanity was losing ground, but they were making victory taste like ashes for the Zathrians. Every colony taken was a burned ruin. Every position captured was soaked in blood from both sides. The Zathrians were learning that conquering humanity wouldn't be like their other wars. Humans didn't break. They didn't give up. They adapted and kept fighting, finding new ways to hurt their enemies, even when they were losing. War Marshal Krenix received reports from the front and felt his confidence crumbling. The Empire was winning, yes, but winning like this would destroy them. He had expected to crush humanity in months. Now his advisors were telling him it might take years, and they might not have enough military strength to succeed. For the first time in his life, Krenix wondered if he had made a mistake, but pride kept him from admitting it. He demanded more ships from the homeworld, more troops, more resources. The Empire would conquer humanity no matter the cost. They had to. Showing weakness now would invite rebellion from every species they had conquered. But deep in his mind, a voice whispered that it might already be too late. Admiral Susan Grant stood in the command center above Earth and looked at the tactical display. 6 months had passed since the war began. The Zathrians controlled 8 human colonies now, and their grand fleet was assembling for what they clearly intended to be the final blow. Over 500 warships were gathering at Epsilon Station, the main defensive line protecting the core human worlds. "They're going to throw everything at us," her tactical officer said. "If they break through here, there's nothing between them and Earth." "Then we don't let them break through," Grant said simply. She had been planning this battle for months. The Zathrians thought they knew how humans fought by now. They had adapted to the ambush tactics and the traps. They expected humanity to use guerrilla warfare and hit-and-run attacks. Grant was counting on those expectations. "Send the signal," she ordered. "Execute Plan Ragnarok." Across human space, ships began moving. Not just military vessels, but every armed craft humanity could gather. Converted freighters with weapons welded to their hulls, mining ships carrying loads of explosives, old patrol boats that had been in storage for decades. They all converged on Epsilon Station, and the Zathrians watched them come with satisfaction. War Marshal Krenix stood on his flagship bridge and smiled. The humans were finally going to face him in a real battle, fleet against fleet. No more tricks, no more running, just pure military power, and the Zathrians had more of it. "They're making this easy," his second-in-command said. "They're desperate," Krenix replied. "They know if they lose here, the war is over. So they're gambling everything on one battle, a foolish decision, but it will save us time. After today, humanity will be broken. The two fleets met near Epsilon Station, and the battle began. At first, it seemed to go exactly as Krennics expected. The Zathrians had the numbers and the firepower. Human ships started dying, just as they had in every other major engagement. Then Lieutenant Commander Alex Porter led his fighter wing into the battle, and everything changed. Porter's pilots didn't fight like space fighters were supposed to fight. They used tactics from atmospheric combat, from the dogfights of ancient Earth wars. They dove and rolled and broke in ways that made no sense in space combat, but somehow worked. The Zathrian gunners, trained on standard space tactics, couldn't track them effectively. "They're flying like madmen," Porter heard one of his pilots say over the comm. "That's because we are mad," Porter replied. "Mad that they attacked us, mad that they killed our people, mad that they thought we'd be easy prey. Now show them what angry humans can do." The fighters tore into the Zathrian formation, not trying to destroy the big ships, but targeting their sensors and weapon systems. They were mosquitoes harassing giants, but mosquitoes with plasma cannons. While the fighters created chaos, Captain Veronica Mills prepared for her mission. She commanded the destroyer Relentless, and she had volunteered for a one-way trip. Her ship was loaded with every explosive device the engineers could fit in the hold. She was a missile with a human guidance system. "Captain, we can still turn back," her second-in-command said quietly. "No, we can't," Mills replied. "My daughter is on Earth. My parents, my friends, everyone I love is back there. If we don't stop the Zathrians here, they all die. So we're not turning back." She aimed her ship at the Zathrian flagship and pushed the engines to maximum. The Zathrians tried to stop her, throwing everything they had at the Relentless, but Mills was determined, and determination can achieve impossible things. Her ship, burning and breaking apart, smashed into Krennic's flagship and exploded. The blast was enormous. It destroyed the flagship and damaged a dozen nearby Zathrian vessels. More importantly, it killed War Marshal Krennic and threw the Zathrian command structure into chaos. On the ground at Epsilon Station, Colonel Dennis Harper commanded the defensive batteries. The station had been built as a trade hub, but engineers had spent months converting it into a fortress. Harper had railguns that could punch through ship hulls, missile batteries that could track hundreds of targets, and a determination to make the Zathrians regret every meter they advanced. "All batteries, open fire," he ordered. "Show them that space isn't the only battlefield." The station's guns tore into the Zathrian fleet from below, creating a crossfire with the human ships attacking from above. The Zathrians found themselves trapped between two forces, taking damage from multiple angles. In the chaos of battle, engineer Sam Peters showed what human creativity could do. His ship had been crippled early in the fight, weapons destroyed and engines barely functioning. A normal person would have abandoned ship. Peters saw an opportunity. "Route all power to the forward shields," he ordered his crew. "We can't shoot, but we can still ram." He turned his dying ship into a battering ram, using its momentum and the last of its shield power to crash into Zathrian vessels. It was insane and brilliant, and 3 enemy ships were destroyed before Peters' vessel finally broke apart. Admiral Grant coordinated all of this from her command center, seeing the battlefield as a whole. She moved her ships like pieces on a chessboard, always thinking 3 moves ahead. When the Zathrians tried to concentrate their forces, she split her fleet and attacked from the sides. When they spread out, she massed her ships for concentrated strikes. But what really won the battle was something the Zathrians couldn't counter: human psychology. Dr. Nathan Cross had created a new weapon, but it wasn't a gun or a missile. It was information. He had studied Zathrian communications and psychology for months, and he had found their weakness. The Zathrians valued honor and tradition above everything. They feared being seen as weak or cowardly. So Cross created messages and broadcast them across the battlefield. Messages that questioned Zathrian courage. messages that suggested their empire was falling apart, messages that made individual Zathrian commanders doubt their orders and their leaders. It was psychological warfare, and it worked. Zathrian captains started making mistakes. They hesitated when they should have attacked. They broke formation when they should have held. Their rigid military tradition, which had been a strength for centuries, became a weakness when faced with an enemy that used their own values against them. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the Grand Zathrian fleet was destroyed. Nearly 70% of their ships were gone, either destroyed or crippled beyond repair. The human losses were heavy too, but sustainable. More importantly, humanity had won its first major victory. Grant looked at the damage reports and felt no joy. Victory tasted like ashes when she counted the cost. Captain Mills was dead, along with thousands of other brave people who had given everything. But their sacrifice had saved Earth and the core colonies. The war would continue, but now humanity had hope. In the wreckage of the battle, a single Zathrian officer sat in an escape pod and watched his civilization's grand fleet burn. His name was Commander Vex, and he had been Krennic's tactical advisor. He had warned the war marshal that humans were more dangerous than they appeared. Now Krennic was dead, and the Empire's military was shattered. Vex made a decision. When he was rescued, he would return home and tell the truth. The war with humanity was unwinnable. The Empire had to find a way to make peace before there was nothing left to salvage. On Earth, President Foster addressed the people again. Today we achieved a great victory at Epsilon Station, but it came at a terrible cost. Thousands died to protect our worlds. We honor their sacrifice by continuing the fight. The Zathrians are hurt, but they're not defeated. We must remain strong, remain united, and see this through to the end. Across human space, people heard the news and felt something they hadn't felt in months: hope. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, it seemed like something they could actually win. In the Zathrian capital, far from the battle, the High Council received news of the disaster. They had lost their grand fleet and their top military commander. Other species they had conquered were watching and sensing weakness. Rebellions were starting to break out. The Empire was in crisis. "We need to negotiate," one council member said. "We cannot show weakness," another replied. "We must rebuild the fleet and attack again." "With what ships?" a third council member demanded. "We've lost most of our military in 6 months. If we continue this war, the Empire will collapse." The debate raged, but the outcome was becoming clear. Humanity had done what no other species had managed. They had hurt the Zathrian Empire badly enough to make it question its own strength. And once that doubt took hold, everything would change. Commander Vex stood before the Zathrian High Council and spoke words that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "We cannot win this war," he said flatly. "The humans are not like other species we have conquered. Every battle costs us more than we can afford. If we continue, the Empire will collapse. We must seek peace." The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Peace was surrender. Peace was weakness. The Zathrian Empire did not negotiate with prey species, but Vex stood firm. "I have fought the humans," he said. "I have watched them adapt to every strategy we use. They learn from each defeat and come back stronger. War Marshal Krennic underestimated them, and it cost him his life and our fleet. If we make the same mistake, it will cost us our empire." For 3 days, the council debated. On the 4th day, news came that changed everything. The Kelrath, one of the species the Zathrians had conquered 20 years ago, had risen in rebellion. They had seen the Empire's weakness and decided to fight for their freedom. If the war with humanity continued, more rebellions would follow. The Council made its decision. Commander Vex would lead a delegation to Earth and negotiate terms for peace. It was a bitter moment for the Empire, but survival mattered more than pride. On Earth, President Foster received the message with mixed feelings. The war was far from over. Human forces had pushed into Zathrian territory and were liberating the colonies they had lost. Every week brought new victories, but every victory came with a cost in lives and resources. "They want to negotiate," Foster told his advisors. "Should we accept?" General Blake spoke first. "We're winning. If we keep pushing, we can destroy their military completely. We can dictate terms from a position of total victory." "At what cost?" Ambassador Newton asked. "How many more will die for complete victory versus negotiated peace? The Zathrians are offering to end this. Shouldn't we at least hear what they have to say?" Foster looked at the casualty reports on his desk. 500,000 humans were dead. Entire colonies had been destroyed. The economy was strained to the breaking point. Yes, humanity was winning, but the price of that victory was measured in graves. "We'll hear them out," Foster decided. "But we negotiate from strength. They started this war. They killed our people. If we make peace, it will be on our terms." 3 weeks later, Commander Vex arrived on Earth with his delegation. It was the first time Zathrians had set foot on humanity's homeworld, and the experience was humbling. Everywhere Vex looked, he saw a civilization that had transformed itself for war. Factories churned out weapons day and night. Every able-bodied person seemed to be either in uniform or working to support the war effort. This was not a weak species. This was a sleeping giant that the Empire had foolishly awakened. The negotiations took place in Geneva, in a building that had seen countless peace talks over human history. Vex sat across from Ambassador Newton and President Foster, with Dr. Elizabeth Morgan serving as a cultural liaison to help both sides understand each other. "We want all conquered territories returned," Foster began. "All human prisoners released. Reparations for the colonies you destroyed and the people you killed." "And in return?" Vex asked. "We won't destroy your empire," Foster said simply. "We could, you know. Our forces are pushing deeper into your territory every day. Your subject species are rebelling. If we wanted to, we could crush you completely. But we don't want that. We never wanted any of this." Vex was quiet for a moment. "Why? We attacked you. We killed your people. By the laws of war, you would be justified in destroying us completely. Why would you offer peace?" Dr. Morgan spoke up. "Because humans understand something your empire never learned. War is not glorious. It's not honorable. It's terrible and destructive, and the only good thing about it is when it ends. We fight when we must, but we don't fight for revenge or glory. We fight to protect what we love, and what we love most is peace." The negotiations continued for weeks. The terms were hard for the Zathrians to accept. They would withdraw from all human territory. They would pay reparations. They would accept human observers to ensure they were disarming their forward fleets. They would release not just human prisoners, but all the slaves from other conquered species who wanted freedom. In return, humanity would help rebuild Zathrian worlds damaged in the war. Human technology would be shared to help the Zathrian economy recover, and most importantly, humanity would not pursue total victory. The Zathrian Empire would survive, diminished but intact. "Why help us recover?" Vex asked during one session. "We are your enemies." "You were our enemies," Newton corrected. "Now you're going to be our neighbors. We can either have stable, peaceful neighbors or desperate, angry ones. The choice is obvious." Back in space, General Patricia Ross was leading the human forces liberating the conquered colonies. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, and she proved it when Zathrian forces surrendered. Unlike their treatment of defeated enemies, she accepted their surrender with honor, treated prisoners well, and even allowed Zathrian medical teams to care for their own wounded. Word of Ross's treatment spread through the Zathrian military. More and more units chose to surrender rather than fight to the death. They had expected cruelty and found mercy instead. It was confusing and, in its own way, more devastating than any weapon. Captain Frank Gibson, promoted after his actions at the border outpost, led forces into one of the liberated colonies and found something that broke his heart. The Zathrians had been holding human prisoners as slaves, forcing them to work in mines and factories. The conditions were brutal, and many had died. Gibson ordered his medical teams to provide immediate care and his engineers to start repairing the damage. "We'll get you home," he promised the freed prisoners. "All of you. That's what this war was about, getting everyone home." Dr. Nathan Cross was part of the team sharing technology with the Zathrians. It was strange, teaching former enemies how to use human innovations, but Cross understood the bigger picture. A defeated empire with nothing to lose was dangerous. A defeated empire given a path to recovery would be much more likely to honor the peace. "This reactor design is more efficient than what you're using," Cross explained to a group of Zathrian engineers. "It's also safer. You can rebuild your infrastructure faster with this technology." The Zathrian engineers were skeptical at first. Why would an enemy help them? But as they worked with Cross and his team, they began to understand. Humans thought differently than Zathrians. They didn't see the galaxy as a ladder where you climbed by stepping on others. They saw it as a place where everyone could rise together. Finally, after 3 months of negotiation, the treaty was signed. The war was over. Across human space, people celebrated, but the celebration was muted. Too many were mourning lost loved ones. Too many carried scars that would never fully heal. Admiral Jake Morrison, promoted from captain after his crucial role in First Contact, attended the signing ceremony. He thought about the 300 miners who had died at the war's start. Their deaths had sparked everything that followed. Hundreds of thousands more had died since then on both sides. Was it worth it? He didn't have an answer. The war had been necessary once the Zathrians attacked, but necessary didn't make it good. Winning didn't erase the cost. President Foster gave a speech after the signing. "Today we make peace with a former enemy. This war taught us many things. It taught us that humans, when pushed, are capable of great violence, but it also taught us that we're capable of great mercy. The Zathrians made a mistake when they attacked us. They thought our peace meant we were weak. They learned we're only peaceful because we choose to be. But we also choose to be merciful. We could destroy the Zathrian Empire, but we choose to help them rebuild instead. Because that's who we are. We're not conquerors. We're not enslavers. We're defenders of our homes and our freedom, but we're also builders of a better future." In the years that followed, the relationship between humans and Zathrians slowly transformed. It started with trade, careful and limited at first. Then cultural exchanges. Young Zathrians came to human universities to study. Young humans traveled to Zathrian worlds to learn their history. 10 years after the war ended, the first joint human-Zathrian space station was built. It served as a symbol of what could be achieved when species worked together instead of fighting. Commander Vex attended the opening ceremony, now an ambassador rather than a military officer. Admiral Morrison was there too, older and grayer but still sharp. He stood with Vex and looked at the young people from both species working together. "Do you think they understand?" Vex asked. "Do they know what it cost to reach this point?" "Some do," Morrison replied. "The ones who lost family in the war, they understand. But maybe it's better that most of them don't. Maybe it's good that they can work together without carrying all the hate and pain we had to deal with." "Your species taught us a hard lesson," Vex said quietly. "We thought peace meant weakness. We learned it means wisdom, the ability to destroy, but choosing not to. That's real strength." "We learned something too," Morrison admitted. We spent so long trying to be better than our violent past that we almost forgot we could defend ourselves if needed. The war reminded us that peace isn't just hoping no one attacks you. It's being strong enough to defend yourself while still choosing peace whenever possible. They stood in silence for a while, two old warriors watching the younger generation build something better. The war had been terrible, but it had taught both species valuable lessons. The Zathrians learned that conquest wasn't the path to greatness. Humanity learned that pacifism and strength could coexist. The title of their first encounter had proven prophetic. The Zathrians had indeed declared war on the wrong species, not because humans were unbeatable warriors, but because humans understood something more important than winning battles. They understood that the point of strength was protecting peace, not pursuing glory. And that understanding, born from blood and sacrifice, had created something new in the galaxy. A friendship between former enemies, a peace built not on fear but on mutual respect, a future where species didn't have to choose between being strong and being peaceful. They could be both. The Zathrians had declared war on the wrong species. They just didn't know it yet.